This is titled Profiles of the Future. It's written by Arthur C. Clarke. He's also known as the author of 2001 Space Odyssey. And this is the documentary that he wrote. Here, this is better. Actually, it's more like a non-fiction than a documentary. In that book, he wrote Clarke's 3 laws. And the book explains what they are. For example, what happens if Leonardo da Vinci, Archimedes, or Galileo Galilei saw a helicopter or a car? The point is to discuss how difficult it is to predict the future. Some people often embrace human imagination by saying, look at these old documents, novels, and comic books. The modern times were predicted a long time ago. While others say, those are all wrong predictions of the future, so they are untrustworthy. Clarke saw consistent laws in this kind of future predictions and advocated them. In the book, he claimed, if we brought people from different eras 1,000 years apart from each other, like Da Vinci, Archimedes, and Galileo Galilei, and showed modern technologies like helicopters or cars, they would understand their principles instantly and wouldn't have to think or investigate any further. That's because gasoline engines and airplanes were invented based on the physical laws from their time. So it's not so hard for them to understand those technologies. But it would either be impossible or difficult for them to understand such things like the TV, computer, or nuclear reactor because they didn't know that electrons or electric currents exist. The easiest example, according to Clarke, is the atomic bomb. The simplest explanation behind the science is that you can create an explosion just by putting 2 masses of uranium together. So, what happens if we say that to a 19th century scientist? What if we tell them, if we put these together, we can create an explosion as big as 2 tons of coal? The scientists would be shocked and patiently ask, do you know the law of thermal energy? Then, using their far deeper knowledge about science, such as the laws of physics and chemical reaction, they would spend a long time politely explaining to us how it would be impossible to create thermal energy just by putting 2 pieces of metal together. That's how nuclear reaction is out of paradigm for those who don't know it. Clarke said that's why people couldn't understand it. So, after consolidating all the tendencies, he established 3 laws about future predictions. These are the 3 laws. This one doesn't glare, right? The first law says, when a distinguished but elderly scientist states that something is possible, he is almost certainly right. When he states that something is impossible, he is most probably wrong. The second law, the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. And the third, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The third one is famous, but the second one is a bit difficult. What it is that Clarke warned us not to say, something doesn't exist unless this was scientifically proven through numerous tests, and that includes superstitious phenomena, like telepathy or psychokinesis. The second law explains what thinking scientifically means, and the third law is the most famous one, which many of you might know. My point is that Laputa is sci-fi, and Miyazaki uses these 3 laws effectively in the movie. For example, the machines Dola and her family use are made from quite advanced technologies of that time, but they are still explainable. Something even Pazu can understand just by looking. But a lot of the technologies we see in the castle in the sky are unexplainable. These 2 types are contrasted, such as steam engines that use coal energy and petroleum combustion engines that the Dola family uses versus Laputa's ultra science. And that ultra science technology is divided into 2 layers. Miyazaki shows these different levels of technology to make such an, how should I say, interesting and profound world of science fiction. So, let's first look at the tiger moth. The tiger moth is an aircraft that the Dola family uses as a base. It's a bit less than 40 meters long. There's actually no official plan for this. When a food company called Ajinomoto sold a Laputa-related product, Miyazaki made one up. This is how it looks. Right here, there are 4 propellers rotating inversely. They're pretty complex. The majority of the heavy machinery in the world of Laputa is run by coal steam engines. The Tiger Moth has a petroleum combustion engine which drives these 4 propellers in opposite directions. So it's an intricate mechanism. So you might think that these wings with large propellers on each side are the main propulsion system, but they aren't. The aircraft makes a vertical ascent by tilting these wings up and down, or steep turns by changing the pitch of the propellers. So again, this is a pretty intricate mechanism. Here. This is a scene where Pazu is taken to the engine driver. There you see these giant gears. Pazu instantly understands the mechanism because he's good with machines and starts helping out right away. That's the level of complexity. But they do everything from moving the wings to rotating the 4 propellers in the back and 2 large ones in the front, using only 1 engine. So, the power transmission is extremely complicated. But a lot of factories during the Industrial Revolution had the same problem of having a complex power transmission system. This is not the best visual resource, but take a look. This is a copper plate print that shows a typical large-scale factory during the Industrial Revolution. You see how the belts stretch upwards? These belts are connected to the shaft at the ceiling. Steam engines outside the factory spin the shaft at high speed. Then, through the belts, the power gets conveyed to the weavers in front of the working ladies. That's how the weavers work. It means that a weaver is located in front of each working lady, but its power source is not inside the factory. It is the steam engine outside. And by running the engine vigorously, a huge shaft located at the center of the ceiling spins and spins and spins, and that's where the bells receive the driving force. Here's another picture, a more specific one from Lancashire, England. This one. This is a picture of a weaving factory in Lancashire. This is how it works. There's a huge spinning shaft that drives the belts with its power. That's why when we think of the machinery in the world of Laputa, we usually picture them with gears. But if we take a closer look, you also see these pulleys or belts as well. And when Pazu goes to the engine room of the Tiger Moth and the engine driver tells him to help, what Pazu does is switch gears. So you can tell how the power transmission of the Tiger Moth is a lot more complex than the majority of the machinery in their world, which are usually steam engines. You can also tell that most aircraft operations are done in the engine room, such as changing the movement of the propellers or the angles of the wings are done mechanically by shifting gears from here to there and switching the belts from that side to this side. It's like your bicycles. You know how you shift the 5-level gears on the back of your bicycles? When you do that, you see the chain switching from one gear to another. So, you see this control tower, which is at the front of the aircraft, is where Dola is. But all she does is give orders through the voice tube. Dola and the others just give orders on where to move the aircraft. And how to move the aircraft is all taken care of in the engine room. This system of control towers giving the orders and the engine rooms doing the actual machine handling is ideologically advanced in the context of 19th century technology. This is also an early stage automation system which eventually becomes mainstream. But then, these are the machines you see more in adventure stories than sci-fi. By the way, the Tiger Moth, actually, it's hard to open this with my nails. On the backside, there's a jump door for the flaptors to fly out of the aircraft. And honestly, it's a sarcastic reference to Mobile Suit Gundam. In Gundam, everything from White Base to Zeon's Ga attack carrier, they all jump from the front side of the ship hull. And that's aerodynamically impossible. Miyazaki was like, cut the crap! If any aircraft has a jump door, it's in the back. So he deliberately showed a scene with the flappers jumping out from the back. To sum up, a machine in Raputa, like the tiger moth, is not scientific enough to be considered sci-fi, although it's close enough. It's more adventure story-like. Next, how about the flappers that the Dola family uses? Oh, wing came off, but don't worry, it comes right back on. Flaptors fly using the vibration of wings moved by electrically powered artificial muscles, so it's half sci-fi. There is an image where the driver starts the engine by inserting a crank here and turning it by hand. That feels kind of retro, no? But the idea of using a generator to make electricity as a driving force is actually pretty new in the Industrial Revolution. Actually, generators were invented before motors. The mechanism of a motor was accidentally discovered during the Vienna International Exhibition in 1873, when an engineer wired a generator wrong and caused the backflow of electricity. But that made the generator start moving on its own, and people were like, what? So the motor was discovered through that accident? But Dola's ex-husband or lover, who invented the flaptors, didn't know the relationship between generators and motors. So he tried to move the wings by artificial muscles with the electricity generated by an engine. This idea of using artificial muscles with electricity was discovered by a doctor and physicist called Galvani in the late 18th century in Italy. He discovered that if you electrify the legs of dead frogs, they move. This is famous portrait of Galvani, but you see the image of a dead frog and electrode. It must suck for him to have this as the most famous portrait. Anyway, the discovery itself was super sensational. In high-class salons in Europe back then, not only sports and fine arts, but also science was a popular topic. Now, I already talked about this 2 years ago. A famous poet during that time called Lord Byron read Galvani's theory in a newspaper article. He was with his poet friend called Percy Shelley and his 16-year-old fiancée with whom he eloped, called Mary. Well, there was one more person, but that's not important. When they were at the holiday house at the bank of Lake Leman in Switzerland, he read the article and said, "This is cool! Let's make this into a novel!" And they said, "Yeah, let's do it." But only Mary actually wrote it. That novel she wrote about an artificial body that moves by electricity was later recognized as Frankenstein. But I already talked about this part a year and a half ago. Flaptor is a machine that's made with shafts and gears, which people today can understand the structure of. So they are realistic except for the artificial muscles, which I think are more science fictional.